Today I bring you a tale of marriage and cannibalism, all entwined in the glorious tale of Captain Murderer. Now, with a name like that and a tale featuring all these grislier aspects, you would think that this would be a tale straight from the Brothers Grimm. But you'd be wrong. This tale comes from the highly acclaimed literary genius of an English author. That same author that brought you wholesome tales such as Oliver Twist and A Christmas Carol. None other than Charles Dickens. And this one was put to paper around September 1860, so definitely around Halloween time. And this tale was relayed to Charles Dickens when he was in his youth by his nanny, who probably liked scaring children. And when recalling this story, Dickens is quoted as saying, "The young woman who brought me acquainted with Captain Murderer had a fiendish enjoyment of my terrors, and used to begin, I remember, as a sort of introductory overture, by clawing at the air with both hands, and uttering a long, low, hollow groan. So acutely did I suffer from this ceremony, in combination with this infernal captain, that I sometimes used to plead I thought I was hardly strong enough and old enough to hear the story again just yet. But she never spared me one word of it. And I'm not going to spare you lot either." Now, you would think with a name such as Captain Murderer, this guy would be an outcast, but absolutely not. He was welcomed into the best society and had immense wealth, which might have had something to do with it. But Captain Murderer's mission was not society. His mission was matrimony and the gratification of his cannibal appetites with young, tender brides. Sounds like a catch right there. Now, on the morning of his marriages, he always had both sides of the road leading up to the church planted with special, delicate little green flowers. And when the young brides always asked him, because they always did, "What are these flowers?" he replied that they were garnish for a house lamb. And he would laugh ferociously at this joke in a very horrid way, causing immense disquiet to the bridal company by the show of his sharp teeth, which before they had not seen. He made love in a coach and six, and was married in a coach and 12. All of his horses were milk white, except for a single red spot on the back of each, which he had hidden with a harness, because that was his bride's blood. All the brides that he had ever had a spot of blood on each of the horses. Now, when the feasting and the revelry was done, and the guests had long departed, and he was alone with his wife, it was Captain Murderer's whimsical custom to produce a golden rolling pin and a silver pie board. Now, when the captain was courting his intended, he always asked them whether they could bake a pie crust. And if they could, then it was all well and good, and if they couldn't, they were soon taught. And they were taught well. So when the new bride saw Captain Murderer bring out this golden rolling pin and this silver pie board, she was incredibly touched, because she remembered their courtship, how lovely it was just baking and being taught to bake a pie crust by her intended, and she got quite teary. It was quite lovely. This guy's really nice. And she made herself ready to bake her husband a wonderful pie. And as she was rolling out the pastry, the captain brought out an immense silver pie dish. I mean, this thing was practically a bathtub. And he brought out all the flour, all the butter, all the eggs, everything you would need to bake a pie, except the filling. When the lovely bride asked Captain Murderer what kind of pie this was going to be, what kind of pie did he want, he just simply replied with, "I want a meat pie." But the bride saw no meat on the table, and so the captain said to her, "Look in the glass," for there was a mirror in the kitchen. She looked in the glass, but saw nothing, and the captain roared with laughter. Then his demeanour instantly switched, and suddenly he was frowning and drew his sword, bidding her to roll out the crust. So the bride rolled out the crust, all the while dripping tears into it, because the captain seemed so cross with her. When she had lined the dish with the crust and cut it to fit, the captain called out that he could see the meat in the glass. and the bride looked up at the glass just in time to see the captain cutting her head off. He chopped her into pieces, peppered her, salted her, and put her in the pie, sent it to the baker's to be baked, and when it came back, ate it all and picked his teeth with the bones. Now Captain Murderer went along his way, and he was prospering exceedingly, even while having to shell out for all these weddings. And he came upon a house that had 2 twin daughters, and they were both exceedingly beautiful. One was blonde, one was dark-haired, and he just didn't know which one to pick. But the fair twin was hopelessly in love with him, while the darker-haired twin hated his guts and wasn't afraid to say so. So he chose the fair one. And the dark twin would have prevented this marriage in any way possible, but she was completely powerless to prevent her sister marrying this horrible man, whom everybody loved because of his money. However, the night before the wedding, much suspicious of Captain Murderer, she stole out and climbed his garden wall, looked in his window through a slit in the shutters, and saw him having his teeth filed sharp. On the day of the wedding, she listened very closely for any kind of clue, and she overheard him make his practical joke about the flowers and the house lamb to his new blushing bride. And after the wedding, exactly a day to the date that they were married, Captain Murderer had his new bride roll out the pie crust again. The captain had the pie crust rolled out, and he chopped off the fair twin's head. He chopped her into little pieces, he peppered her, he salted her, he put the pieces in the pie, sent it to the baker's, had it baked, ate it, and dug the bones out from his very sharp teeth. Now, the darker twin had already had her suspicions raised about the ulterior motives of this captain, by seeing the captain file his teeth the night before the wedding, and that practical unfunny joke about the flowers and the house lamb, that when the captain gave out that her fair twin was dead, she divined the truth, and she was determined to have her revenge for losing her beloved twin. So what did she do? So she went up to Captain Murderer's house and she knocked on the door. And when he answered, she looked up into his face and said, "Dear Captain Murderer, please marry me next. I have always loved you, and I was hotly jealous of my sister, and I never meant for it to come across that I hated you. I just loved you so much." Now the captain took it as a tremendous compliment and made a polite answer to her and arranged the wedding in record time. Now the night before their wedding was scheduled to take place, the dark bride once again climbed over the garden wall and up to the shutters, and once again saw Captain Murderer's teeth being filed sharp. At this, she laughed such a terrible laugh at the slit in the shutters that the captain's blood curdled, and he said that he had hoped nothing had disagreed with him. And at that, she laughed still a more terrible laugh, and the shutter was flung open, but the dark bride was already nimbly away into the night. The next day, they made their way to church in the coach and 12, and they were married. But this time, he couldn't make his joke about the flowers, because his dark bride didn't ask. And a month to the day of their wedding, Captain Murderer brought out the pie crust, and the dark bride rolled it out, and Captain Murderer chopped off her head. He chopped her into pieces, he peppered her, he salted her, he put her in the pie, he sent it to the baker's, he ate every last piece, and picked over the bones. Now I know what you're thinking. What was the point of all this? How did she get her revenge if she allowed herself what she knew would happen to her sister? And she was dead. So what's she gonna do? Well, before the dark bride started rolling out the pastry, she drank a poison of the most deadly and awful character, made from toad's eyes and spider's knees. Captain Murderer had hardly picked at her last bone when he began to swell, to turn blue, to have spots all over, and to scream. And he kept swelling, turning bluer, more spots, and more screaming, until he reached from floor to ceiling and from wall to wall. Then, at 1 o'clock in the morning, he blew up with a loud explosion. At the sound of this explosion, all the milk-white horses in the stables threw off their harnesses and galloped around and went mad. They galloped over everyone left in Captain Murderer's house, beginning with the family blacksmith, who was responsible for filing Captain Murderer's teeth every time the night before every wedding, until all were dead and crushed under their hooves. The house was covered in gore and then set ablaze, and the horses galloped away, finding their freedom right at the end. And now it's time for your freedom. If you like this video, please leave me a like and comment how you would have dealt with such a deadly bridegroom. And always remember to just keep reading.